to another episode of EricTheCarGuy. That would be me. I have had a great deal of response, once again, to my Honda No Start video. And lots of people keep saying, I've replaced the fuel pump, this still isn't working. Lots of questions really pertaining to general diagnosis of a no start issue. That's what we're going to cover in this video right here. In order for an internal combustion engine to run, you need three things. The first thing is spark, and that is from the ignition system. In other words, you need spark at the spark plugs. The next thing you need is fuel, obviously, and that's where the no start for the main relay comes in, because what that does actually is it does not allow the fuel pump to turn on. Thus, the engine does not have fuel, it will not start. And the third thing actually has two parts, and that's timing. And what I mean by that is you need correct ignition timing, so the spark plug needs to fire at the proper time. But in addition to that, you also need the engine to be mechanically in time, so the piston and the valves need to be working in concert in order for the engine to run. I want to add one more thing that we'll call a fourth thing, and that is the engine needs to be mechanically sound. In other words, the compression needs to be there. If there is some kind of mechanical failure where the piston is unable to compress the mixture, then of course it's not going to be able to run correctly. My experience in these situations is they don't necessarily cause a no-start condition, but the engine will run very poorly in that case. Unless there's a failure of compression across the board, which can happen, say the cylinder walls get washed down by fuel and the car is flooded, in which case what you want to do is, if the car is cranking very, very fast, it seems like there's no resistance to the engine whatsoever. Just try this for the heck of it. In order to get the car into what's called clear flood mode, and this only works on fuel-injected models for the most part anyway, is that you take the gas pedal and put it all the way to the floor and crank the engine. Continue to do so to clear the flood. In other words, clear the excess fuel that's in the cylinders that has basically washed all the oil away from the sides of the pistons, and therefore you don't have any compression. Do this for a period of time, and if you're unsuccessful with that, pretty much what you're going to have to do is remove the spark plugs, dry them out, and go from there. But that's in a case where you have a no start, where the engine is cranking but not firing, and the engine is in essence flooded, which this does happen from time to time. But the main point is if the engine cannot mechanically produce compression, either because of a failure of, say, the sealing of the pistons or a valve, or if it's a question of the engine is out of time mechanically, where the pistons and the valves are not moving together, thus cannot create some form of compression. So I guess the third/fourth thing should really be engine compression. So the mechanical health of the engine needs to be there in order for the car to run. Back to you, Eric. An often overlooked part of diagnosis, and the mechanical issues can cause no start problems. The tendency is to blame something electronic. It's not always the case. So follow these procedures to find out exactly what is going on, and then proceed with your diagnosis from there. Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about here is checking the spark. Now, I use this handy little tool that I bought. You may be able to find these at an auto parts store, that you can plug in place of the spark plug in order to check for spark. You could probably use a screwdriver in the end of this and hold it close to a ground, but you better be careful, because you can get shocked, and some ignition systems have a great deal of voltage behind them, and some of them have enough amperage to hurt you, so be careful when doing this. But this is a nice hands-free way of checking for spark. So the first thing I check for usually is spark. Now, as you can see, this engine had plenty of spark. In fact, this engine runs. I'm just going through the principles of diagnosis here. If you don't see spark there at the spark plug, follow the chain and go back to the coil itself and see if you have spark coming out of the coil. If you have spark coming out of the coil but not at the spark plug, then there's a problem in between there. Could be the cap, could be the rotor, something in the secondary side of the ignition system. So that's what you do. You start from one logical point and work your way back towards the problem. And that's the whole point of diagnosis, is working logically. Don't make assumptions. The next thing we check for is fuel, which we have in a previous video. Okay, and lastly, you want to make sure that the engine is mechanically in time. Something like a broken timing belt can look like it's okay up top, but it can actually not move any of the engine up top. So the bottom end of the engine needs to be coordinated with the top end of the engine, and on these particular cars, you have to do it with the timing belt. And you may have to remove parts of the engine to verify that the engine is mechanically in time. So you set up the timing marks and make sure that those timing marks are lined up the way they're supposed to be. You can usually check some form of service manual in order to get that information. Okay, and lastly, to check the mechanical health of the engine and its compression, you check that with a compression gauge, which I don't have here, and actually I think I should do a separate video just on checking engine compression. Once again, check the mechanical health of the engine in order to verify that mechanically the engine is sound enough to produce power. Okay, the basics. What makes a car run? Spark, fuel, and timing. So the engine has to breathe. Think of it as a living, breathing thing. If it can't breathe, it can't run. So you can have spark and fuel, but if things are out of time, it's not going to work together. And everything has to work together in order for your engine to run. The most important thing to learn from this video is do not make assumptions. Follow things in a scientific manner. If you don't have spark, find out why you don't have spark. Don't put a fuel pump in it because you don't have spark. That's the kind of thinking you want to avoid. If you don't have spark, follow it back to the source of what you don't have. You may need to get wiring diagrams, consult with somebody who's a professional, whatever. But number one thing, do not make assumptions. I'm Eric the Car Guy. As always, you can visit me at ericthecarguy.com. Comments are always welcome, so stay dirty.